This is a tutorial about how to use Plotly to make a graph. Plotly is an online graphing application that's relatively powerful in terms of data analysis and quite good for science classes. So you'll do a Google search for Plotly and then launch to the Plotly website. When you arrive at the Plotly website, you'll likely be prompted to create an account because you haven't ever visited the website before, although if you used this in a class last year, you probably already have an account. All of my old files, because I have an account, are right here in the My Files, but today I want to create a new graph. So I'm going to go over to here, to the Create tab. Plotly calls graphs charts, so I want to create a chart. And it automatically launches the Plotly 2.0 preview, but since Plotly 2.0 isn't finished yet, I want to switch back to Plotly 1.0. This is the opening screen for Plotly 1.0. Although they give us a starter set of data, we really want to make our own graph, so I'm going to click on the New Grid tab. And in this class, most of the time what we are going to want is a scatter plot rather than a line plot. A scatter plot just puts some points on a graph and lets us decide what we'd like to do with them. Over here is where you're going to enter your data. I'm going to make a graph that shows the mass versus the volume of some pieces of copper, which will ultimately represent the density of copper. On the x-axis, I'm going to put the volume. So I'm going to rename column 1 volume, and I put some units on there because we should always have units on our graph. Hit enter. I want that to be the x-axis, although if I wanted to choose it as the y-axis instead, I could change, or I can change that back, but I do want volume on the x-axis, so I'm going to leave that on the x-axis. On the y-axis, I want to rename and put the mass, and again, I want to include some units, and that's what I would like to have on the y-axis. The next thing I do is enter my data into these columns. So I'm going to use for my mass data 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, representing pieces of copper that have those masses, and I have some volumes to go with those. So I just type my data into these columns. And now I have a set of data. And I can put as much data as I would like to have in here. Once you have all the data in, and you've named your two axes, and you've picked one to be the x-axis and one to be the y-axis, and you've confirmed that you've chosen scatter plot, you can make a new plot. So if you click down here on Make a New Plot, we can make a new plot, and then hit the scatter plot button. It will prompt you then to save your file. I'm going to give it a name. And you always want to give your graphs a name that you're sure you'll be able to find them later if you need them. This will save it to your account. I don't need to share my grid with anybody. And so here is my graph. I always want my graph to have a title, so I can click up here to give my plot a title. And I'm just going to go with mass versus volume for copper, since that's what I did. And just like that, I have my graph. The next thing I want to do is add some kind of a trace. A trace is a line or a curve or something that represents the shape of your data. And that's over here in the Traces menu. The next thing I want to do is I want to fit my data. I want to fit my data with a line or a curve or something that represents the general trend of the data. So I go to this Fit Data button, and I don't have any fits for this trace yet, so I want to add a fit to this trace. Now, my data looks to be relatively linear, although you have all sorts of other options here as well. So you can decide which one looks most like your data, and you can run this fit. And that does, in fact, look a lot like my data. It looks like a good match, and so I can click on OK. Now, as you can see, once I have this line in here, I can drag my mouse along and I can find the coordinates at some of the points along my best fit line. But I don't have a real detailed look at all of the different points. To get a better look at all of the different points, I'm going to go in and I'm going to edit my trace. I want to edit the fit, and under the advanced functions, I want to output, instead of with 50 points that I can look at, I want to output with 1,000 points. When I rerun the fit, now when I drag my mouse along, I have a much finer set of details in terms of the location of each of these points. That can be very useful when working with a graph in science class because it allows you to find a very specific point along the way. At this point, your graph is pretty much done. You can get the data that you need from your graph, and it'll end up being saved to your account.